The voicemail crackled through my phone speaker, each word hitting like ice water. Listen, Victoria, we've talked it over as a family, and honestly, your financial situation is just embarrassing. We can't have you bringing down the mood at Thanksgiving dinner this year. Maybe focus on getting your life together before trying to join successful people at the table. Don't bother coming to Rosewood Manor restaurant. Love, your sister Penelope. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I sat in my car outside the gleaming headquarters of Crimson Hospitality Group in downtown Millbrook Heights, staring at the phone screen as the message ended. Below the voicemail notification was a family group chat that had been buzzing all morning with messages I wasn't supposed to see. But technology had a funny way of exposing people's true feelings. Penelope, honestly, Victoria showing up in her thrift store clothes would be mortifying. What if the Ashworth family sees her? Mother, Catherine. Your father's new partnership with Wellington Industries deserves a proper celebration. We can't have Victoria's situation casting a shadow over our success. Father, Richard. The reservation at Rosewood Manor cost me $2,000 for our party of 12. I won't have our family's reputation tarnished by her financial struggles. Brother, Nathaniel. Agreed. Besides, she probably can't even afford the valet parking there. Save her the embarrassment. Aunt Priscilla? Such a shame. The rest of us have worked so hard to maintain our standing in Millbrook Heights society. Victoria just gave up trying. I leaned back against the leather seat of my car, watching the city's skyline through my windshield. If they only knew where I was sitting. If they only knew that the gleaming 40-story tower in front of me bore my company's name in letters 3 feet tall. If they only knew that their precious Thanksgiving reservation at Rosewood Manor restaurant, the most exclusive dining establishment in the tri-state area, was at a restaurant I had quietly purchased 6 months ago. My phone buzzed again with another message from the group chat. Penelope, I called ahead to make sure our table has the best view of the harbor. Apparently, the new owner has been making incredible improvements. They say it's become even more exclusive than before. I almost laughed out loud. Those incredible improvements included a complete renovation of the kitchen, hiring 3 Michelin-starred chefs, and installing a wine cellar worth more than most people's houses. Every detail had been personally overseen by me, though I'd done it all through my management company to maintain privacy. Mother, Catherine. Perfect, darling. The Blackstone family will be there too, and you know how important those connections are for your father's business. Nathaniel, speaking of business, has anyone heard from Victoria lately? Last I heard, she was still working at that little nonprofit downtown. Such a waste of her potential. A waste of potential. I looked up at the building again, then at the brass nameplate on my dashboard that read, Victoria Ashford, CEO, Crimson Hospitality Group. My little nonprofit was actually a cover story I'd maintained for years while building one of the largest restaurant and hotel empires on the East Coast. I owned 43 restaurants, 12 luxury hotels, and employed over 8,000 people across 6 states. But to my family, I was still the daughter who'd given up after college, who worked for some charity organization, who couldn't afford to keep up with their lifestyle. They'd been so busy climbing their own social ladders that they'd never bothered to ask what I was actually doing with my life. Aunt Priscilla? Well, at least we won't have to explain her situation to the other families at dinner. You know how people talk in our circles. Father Richard. Exactly. Success is about perception, and Victoria's circumstances would send the wrong message about our family's values. Their circumstances. Their values. I pulled up the financial records on my tablet, scrolling through the quarterly reports that my assistant had prepared that morning. Last quarter alone, my restaurants had generated $47 million in revenue. The Rosewood Manor purchase had been an impulse buy, a beautiful property that I'd fallen in love with during a business trip to Millbrook Heights. I'd had no idea my family frequented it until I overheard Penelope bragging about their regular table during a phone call 3 weeks ago. My phone rang, a call from my operations manager, Elena. Victoria, I have the final guest list for Thanksgiving service at Rosewood Manor. We have some VIP reservations that might interest you. Oh, which ones? The Ashford party. Table 12, Harborview, party of 12 at 6 p.m. They've requested our most expensive wine pairings and specifically asked about meeting the owner to compliment the recent renovations. I smiled for the first time all day. Did they now? Yes, and there's more. They've apparently been telling other guests that they're close personal friends with the new ownership. Should I let them know you'll be stopping by their table? Elena, I said, watching another message pop up in the family group chat. I think it's time the Ashford family learned exactly who their, quote, close personal friend really is. Penelope, just confirmed our reservation. The manager says the owner might even make a personal appearance for VIP guests. Imagine, we might actually meet the mysterious new owner of Rosewood Manor. I ended the call with Elena and typed a response in the family chat. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving dinner, everyone. I hope it's everything you've dreamed of. Mother, Catherine. That's mature of you, Victoria. Perhaps next year you'll be in a better position to join us. Next year, I looked at my watch, 2:47 p.m. In 3 hours and 13 minutes, my family would be seated at their prestigious table, completely unaware that every bite of their $300 per plate dinner was being served at the pleasure of the daughter they deemed too poor to join them. I started my car and pulled out of the parking garage, heading toward Rosewood Manor. It was time to make sure everything was perfect for their Thanksgiving celebration. After all, I wanted their meal to be absolutely unforgettable. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As I drove through the upscale Willowbrook district toward Rosewood Manor, my phone continued buzzing with family group chat messages. Each notification revealed more of their twisted perception of my life, painting a picture so far from reality it would have been comical if it weren't so cruel. Penelope. Remember last Christmas when Victoria showed up in that discount store dress? I was mortified when the Hartwell family asked who she was. Nathaniel. At least she had the sense not to bring a date. Can you imagine? Some struggling guy from her nonprofit world meeting our friends? Mother, Catherine. I spoke with Vivian Thornfield yesterday. She mentioned seeing Victoria at the grocery store using coupons. Coupons! In front of half the country club wives. I pulled into the private parking garage beneath Rosewood Manor, using my owner's keycard to access the executive level. Above me, I could hear the soft bustle of afternoon prep as my staff prepared for what would be one of our busiest Thanksgiving services ever. Every table was booked, every dish perfected, every detail scrutinized. My family had no idea they were about to dine in a restaurant where I'd personally tasted every sauce, approved every wine pairing, and trained every server. Father, Richard. The truth is, Victoria simply lacks ambition. She's content with mediocrity while the rest of us strive for excellence. Aunt Priscilla. I remember when she was in college, she had such promise. Dean's List, Honor Society. Then she just settled. Started talking about making a difference, instead of making money. Making a difference. They had no idea that my little nonprofit work had been the perfect cover story while I built an empire. Every business meeting I'd claimed was a charity fundraiser. Every late night I'd said was volunteer work. Every expensive meal I'd explained away as donor events. It had all been real business development for Crimson Hospitality Group. Penelope. The saddest part is she probably thinks we don't care about her. But honestly, what's there to celebrate? She works for practically nothing, lives in that tiny apartment in the Arts District, drives that old Honda. My old Honda was actually a vintage 1995 Civic that I kept for sentimental reasons. It was the car I'd driven when I started my first restaurant, with a $50,000 loan and a dream. My actual daily driver was the Tesla Model S parked in the executive garage, but I'd never brought it to family gatherings. Let them think what they wanted. Mother, Catherine. I tried to help her, you know. I offered to ask Richard's connections about entry-level positions at Wellington Industries. She said she was happy where she was. Happy being poor, apparently. Nathaniel. Remember when she turned down Dad's offer to pay for business school? Said she was learning more in the real world. Look how that turned out. I stepped out of my car and walked toward the private elevator that would take me directly to the restaurant's management office. The irony was exquisite. They thought I'd turned down business school because I couldn't handle the academic rigor. In reality, I'd already been accepted to Harvard Business School when I discovered my passion for hospitality. I'd deferred my acceptance, then eventually declined because I was too busy running 3 successful restaurants by the time I was supposed to start classes. Aunt Priscilla. Victoria always was the dreamer of the family. Remember her silly restaurant fantasies in high school? She wanted to be a chef, of all things. Penelope. Thank God she grew out of that phase, though apparently not far enough to actually succeed at anything. The elevator dinged softly as I reached the executive floor. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see my family's reserved table being set with our finest china and crystal. Table 12 commanded the best view in the house, a panoramic vista of Crescent Harbor that had cost me an additional $2 million in renovation costs to achieve. The table settings alone were worth more than the average person's annual salary. Father, Richard. I suppose we should be grateful she's at least working, even if it's for peanuts. Some children never learn the value of any work at all. Mother, Catherine. True. And at least her failure makes our other children's successes shine brighter. Penelope's marketing firm, Nathaniel's law practice. They're proof that success runs in our family. Nathaniel, speaking of which, did you see the Tribune article about my recent case? Victoria probably doesn't even read the business section. I pulled up the Tribune on my phone and found the article Nathaniel was referencing. It was a small piece about his law firm settling a minor contract dispute, 3 paragraphs buried on page 6 of the business section. Meanwhile, last month's cover story had featured my expansion into the California market, though the article had focused on the mysterious CEO of Crimson Hospitality, since I'd kept my identity private for strategic reasons. Penelope. The restaurant manager mentioned they might introduce us to the new owner tonight. Apparently she's some young business prodigy who's revolutionized fine dining. Aunt Priscilla. How exciting! A successful woman in business. Perhaps she could mentor our Penelope's marketing firm. Mother, Catherine. Wouldn't that be wonderful? To think, we could be dining at the same table where real entrepreneurs conduct business. It's such an inspiring environment for ambitious people. I walked to my office window and looked down at the main dining room. My maitre d', Francois, was conducting the final briefing with tonight's service team. Every waiter had been personally trained by me. Every dish they would serve had been perfected through dozens of iterations in my test kitchen. Every wine in their cellar had been selected during my trips to vineyards across France, Italy, and California. Penelope. I wonder what Victoria's having for Thanksgiving dinner tonight. Probably something sad and lonely from the frozen food section. Nathaniel. Maybe she'll order takeout Chinese food and eat it while watching Netflix. That seems about right for her lifestyle. Father Richard. Let's not be cruel. I'm sure she'll find somewhere to go. Perhaps another charity volunteer will take pity on her. I checked my watch. 4:30 p.m. In 90 minutes, my family would walk through those doors, expecting to be impressed by someone else's success, having no idea they were about to experience the fruits of the daughter they'd written off as a failure. They'd taste my signature dishes, drink my carefully curated wines, and sit at my table while discussing what a disappointment I was to the family name. Mother, Catherine. Well, I should start getting ready. I want to look perfect when we meet this mysterious owner. First impressions matter so much in business. Penelope. Agreed. Too bad Victoria never learned that lesson. I smiled as I watched my staff make the final preparations below. Oh, Penelope, I thought. Tonight you're going to learn that I know exactly how important first impressions are. You're just not prepared for the impression I'm about to make. I made my way through the private corridors of Rosewood Manor, past the executive offices that bore my name on every plaque, toward the heart of my empire. The family group chat had gone quiet as they prepared for dinner, but their silence only gave me more time to reflect on the magnitude of what they truly didn't understand about their failure of a daughter. My first stop was the wine cellar, a subterranean masterpiece that I'd spent 18 months curating. The temperature-controlled room housed over 12,000 bottles, including a 1947 Chateau d'Yquem worth $75,000, and a collection of Burgundies that wine critics called legendary. I selected a 1982 Bordeaux, a $3,000 bottle that would pair perfectly with tonight's lamb course, and made a note for Francois to offer it to table 12 with my compliments. My family would be tasting wine worth more than most people's monthly salary, never knowing it came from their supposedly impoverished daughter's personal collection. Walking through the main kitchen, I surveyed the controlled chaos of Thanksgiving prep. Chef Laurent Dubois, whom I'd poached from La Bernardin in New York, was putting the finishing touches on his signature truffle stuffing. Beside him, Chef Maria Santos, formerly of the French Laundry, supervised the preparation of duck confit that would make my family's jaws drop. These weren't just any chefs. They were culinary artists whose waiting lists used to stretch 6 months. Now they worked exclusively for me, creating masterpieces that food critics traveled across the country to experience. "Victoria!" Chef Laurent called out, wiping his hands on his apron. "The Ashford party, table 12. They've requested your wine recommendations, Non." Francois mentioned they claim to know you personally. I nearly choked on my sparkling water. They think they know me? They told our sommelier that they are, quote, close family friends of the owner, and wanted only the finest selections. His French accent made their presumption sound even more ridiculous. They specifically mentioned wanting to impress their dining companions with their, insider knowledge? The audacity was breathtaking. Not only had they banned me from their Thanksgiving table, but they were now using my supposed friendship to elevate their own status with other diners. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through recent industry publications, articles that mentioned my restaurants but maintained my privacy as requested. Forbes had called me the anonymous empress of fine dining, noting that despite my company's $847 million valuation, I remained, quote, refreshingly private in an age of celebrity chefs. Food and Wine had written a 3-page spread about my mysterious touch that transformed failing restaurants into destination dining experiences. The Wall Street Journal had profiled my business model without ever learning my identity, referring to me only as the visionary behind Crimson Hospitality's unprecedented expansion. But to my family, I was still Victoria, the nonprofit worker who couldn't afford decent clothes. "Chef Laurent," I said, smiling, "please prepare your most exquisite tasting menu for table 12. I want every course to be absolutely perfect. And tell Francois to mention that each dish was personally selected by the owner as a gift for these special guests." I continued my inspection, moving through each station where my hand-picked team created culinary magic. The pastry kitchen, where Chef Antoine prepared desserts that had earned 3 Michelin stars at his previous restaurant in Lyon. The bread station, where we baked fresh sourdough using a starter I'd personally cultivated during a month-long stage in San Francisco. The seafood prep area, where today's lobsters had been flown in fresh from Maine that morning at a cost of $200 per pound. My phone buzzed with a call from my assistant, David. "Victoria, I have the quarterly reports you requested. Would you like me to read the highlights?" "Please do." Rosewood Manor alone generated $4.2 million in revenue last quarter, making it our 3rd highest performing location. The Millbrook Heights market has exceeded all projections since our acquisition. Additionally, 3 more restaurant groups have approached us about potential buyouts, including Sterling Restaurant Holdings and the Blackstone Entertainment Group. Blackstone Entertainment Group, the same family name my mother had mentioned in the group chat, the important connections my father was so eager to impress tonight. They had no idea that the Blackstones had been courting my business for months, hoping to partner with the mysterious owner of Crimson Hospitality. "David, isn't the Blackstone family dining here tonight as well?" "Yes, table 15. James Blackstone specifically requested to meet with you if you were available. He's been trying to schedule a meeting for weeks about potential collaboration on the new Westport development." The irony was exquisite. My father was desperately trying to impress the Blackstones for his own business advancement, while the Blackstones were desperately trying to meet with me for theirs. All of them sitting in my restaurant, eating my food, drinking my wine, breathing my air. I walked up to my private office on the mezzanine level, where floor-to-ceiling windows offered a perfect view of the dining room below. My desk held signed photographs from celebrity guests, thank you notes from food critics, and awards from industry organizations. The James Beard Foundation had nominated me for Outstanding Restaurateur 3 times. Zagat had called my restaurants transcendent experiences that redefine fine dining. Travel Plus Leisure had featured my properties in their World's Best list for 4 consecutive years. But the crown jewel of my office was a framed article from Hospitality Today, the 30 under 30 who changed everything. My photograph occupied the cover, though I had agreed to it only after they promised to limit distribution to industry insiders. The article detailed my rise from a single neighborhood bistro to a 43-restaurant empire, calling my story the most remarkable entrepreneurial journey in modern hospitality. I was 28 years old, owned restaurants in 6 states, employed over 8,000 people, and had been featured on the cover of every major industry publication. My net worth exceeded $200 million. My restaurants had earned a combined total of 12 Michelin stars, and food critics considered me one of the most influential figures in American dining. Yet my family thought I was a charity case. My private elevator chimed, and Elena stepped out carrying a tablet full of tonight's logistics. "Victoria, we have a situation that might amuse you. The Ashford party has asked our sommelier to arrange a meeting with you after dinner. They want to introduce themselves properly and discuss potential business opportunities." Business opportunities? Apparently, Mr. Richard Ashford believes his company's catering contracts might be of interest to you. He's prepared a presentation about Wellington Industries' corporate events department. I leaned back in my chair, watching the dining room fill with guests through my window. Wellington Industries wanted to pitch catering services to me. Services for a company that could cater their largest events with the appetizers from a single one of my restaurants. "Elena, what's Wellington Industries' annual revenue?" She consulted her tablet. "According to their latest filings, approximately $12 million annually. And Crimson Hospitality's revenue last year? $847 million. I watched my family's table being prepared with our finest linens, each place setting worth more than my father's monthly salary. Tonight they would dine like royalty while discussing what a disappointment their daughter was, never realizing that every luxury they enjoyed was courtesy of that same daughter's vision, ambition, and relentless pursuit of excellence. My phone buzzed one more time with a message from Penelope. "Getting ready now. So excited to finally meet successful people who understand what real achievement looks like." Real achievement. I looked around my office, at the empire I'd built from nothing, at the staff who depended on me, at the guests who traveled from around the world to experience what I'd created. Tonight, my family would learn exactly what real achievement looked like. At exactly 5:45 p.m., I positioned myself at the security monitor station where I could watch my family's arrival without being seen. The irony of what I was about to witness had been building for months, but only now was I beginning to understand the full scope of how deeply intertwined their lives had become with my success, completely without their knowledge. My family's Blacktown car pulled up to the valet stand, and I watched them emerge like royalty expecting red carpet treatment. What they didn't know was that the valet service they were using was actually a subsidiary of my hospitality group, Crimson Concierge Services, which I'd launched last year to provide luxury transportation for my restaurant guests. The uniformed driver who opened their door, Marcus Thompson, was on my payroll and had been specifically trained in the white glove service protocols I'd developed. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford," Marcus said, accepting the keys to their Mercedes. "Welcome back to Rosewood Manor. Your usual table is ready, and I've been instructed to ensure your vehicle receives our Platinum Detailing service while you dine." The Platinum Detailing service was a $300 upgrade that I'd personally designed, featuring hand-applied carnauba wax and interior conditioning with leather treatments imported from Italy. My father beamed as if he'd earned this VIP treatment through his own importance, having no idea that his poor daughter had instructed the staff to provide complimentary upgrades to his family whenever they visited. But the real revelation was still to come. As they walked through the grand entrance, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. Penelope was carrying a leather portfolio with the distinctive logo of Hartwell & Associates, the marketing firm she'd mentioned running. What I'd assumed was a small local business was actually the same Hartwell & Associates that had been handling all of my restaurant marketing for the past 8 months. I quickly pulled up my vendor contracts on my tablet, scrolling through the marketing services agreements until I found it. There it was. A $2.3 million annual contract with Hartwell & Associates for comprehensive marketing across my Northeast restaurant portfolio. Every successful campaign that had driven record-breaking reservations to my restaurants, every social media strategy that had earned millions of impressions, every brand positioning that had elevated my properties to must-visit destinations, it had all been Penelope's work. My hands shook as I realized the implications. Penelope had been building her successful marketing career entirely on the foundation of my restaurant empire, never knowing that her biggest client, the client that represented 73% of her firm's revenue, was her supposedly failing sister. I called Elena immediately. "Elena, I need you to pull up everything we have on Hartwell & Associates. Specifically, I want to know about Penelope Ashford's role in our campaigns." "Of course. One moment." I could hear her typing rapidly. "Here we are. Penelope Ashford is listed as the creative director and primary strategist for all Crimson Hospitality accounts. According to our project notes, she's been the lead on 17 major campaigns, including the award-winning Taste the Extraordinary series that increased our reservations by 340% last quarter." My throat felt tight. The campaign she was most proud of, the one she'd been bragging about in family conversations for months, had been for my restaurants. Her greatest professional achievement was literally my success. "Elena, what about her compensation from our contracts? She's earned approximately $847,000 in fees from our account this year alone. In fact, our next quarterly payment of $230,000 is scheduled to process on Monday." I sank into my chair. Penelope's entire livelihood, her fancy car, her designer clothes, her ability to afford meals at restaurants like this one, it was all funded by the sister she'd just banned from Thanksgiving dinner for being too poor. But the connections ran even deeper. Me. I pulled up my legal services contracts and found exactly what I'd begun to suspect. Nathaniel's law firm, Morrison & Associates, had been handling all of my commercial real estate transactions for the past year. Every restaurant lease, every property acquisition, every expansion deal. Nathaniel had been the lead attorney on all of them. The Rosewood Manor purchase alone had generated $340,000 in legal fees for his firm. The upcoming California expansion project would bring in another $500,000. Nathaniel's successful law practice, the career he'd been using to demonstrate his superiority over me, was almost entirely dependent on legal work for my company. I scrolled through his billing records, feeling sick. Nathaniel had negotiated the lease for my flagship restaurant in Boston, handled the acquisition of 3 properties in Connecticut, and was currently working on the most important deal of my expansion, a $15 million purchase in Beverly Hills that would house my first West Coast fine dining establishment. Every late night he'd spent preparing contracts, every complex negotiation he'd successfully navigated, every legal victory he'd celebrated, they were all my victories, achieved for my business empire. My phone rang. It was my accountant, Robert Chen. "Victoria, I have the Wellington Industries reports you requested earlier. You mentioned they might be relevant to tonight's dinner?" "Yes, go ahead." "Well, it's interesting. Wellington Industries has been one of our most consistent corporate catering clients for the past 2 years. They've spent $3.7 million on corporate events, executive dining, and holiday parties across our restaurant group. In fact, they have a standing order for weekly executive lunches at your downtown location, my father's company. His successful business that afforded him the lifestyle he was so proud of. It was thriving partly because of the corporate catering services my restaurants provided. Every important client dinner, every business celebration, every company milestone that had helped build his reputation as a successful executive had been catered by my chefs, served by my staff, planned by my event coordinators. The quarterly reports I was looking at showed that Wellington Industries' most successful client retention events had all been held at my restaurants. Their biggest deal closures had happened over my tables. Their most important partnership announcements had been celebrated with my signature dishes. "Robert, what percentage of Wellington Industries' client entertainment budget do we represent?" Based on their expense reports, approximately 89%. It appears they view dining at your restaurants as a crucial part of their business development strategy. I watched through the monitors as my family was seated at their table, admiring the ambiance and luxury that surrounded them. They had no idea that every aspect of their successful careers had been built on my achievements. Penelope's marketing empire existed because of my restaurant business. Nathaniel's legal success was funded entirely by my expansion deals. My father's business thrived through corporate entertaining at my establishments. Even my mother's social standing in Millbrook Heights society was enhanced by her family's association with the most exclusive restaurants in the city. Restaurants that I owned. They weren't just dining at my restaurant tonight. They were living in a world I had created, succeeding in careers I had funded, maintaining lifestyles that existed because of my business empire. Every dollar they'd earned, every achievement they'd celebrated, every moment of pride they'd experienced in the past 2 years could be traced directly back to contracts with my company. And yet, an hour ago, they'd decided I was too much of a failure to share a Thanksgiving meal with them. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Francois. Please make sure the Ashford party receives copies of all the vendor appreciation gifts we prepared for this quarter. I want them to see exactly how much we value our business partners. Those gifts included personalized photo books showcasing the successful campaigns, engraved crystal awards recognizing outstanding legal services, and specially commissioned artwork celebrating our most important corporate partnerships. Tonight, my family would receive thank you gifts for their contributions to my success, delivered to their table by my staff, while they continued to believe I was too poor to deserve a seat at their table. At 6:15 p.m., my family was seated and settling into their evening of luxury, completely oblivious to the fact that they were surrounded by my creation. I had strategically positioned myself in the private observation booth that overlooked the main dining room, a feature I'd specifically designed for quality control purposes. Tonight it served a different function entirely. What I witnessed over the next hour was a masterclass in arrogance that exceeded even my worst expectations. The evening began when Francois approached their table with the evening's wine selection. I watched through the one-way glass as my father examined the wine list with the pompous authority of someone who believed himself to be a connoisseur. "We'll start with the 1996 Dom Perignon," he announced loudly enough for neighboring tables to hear. "And I want to make sure the sommelier knows we're friends with the owner. We should be getting the premium treatment tonight." Francois, to his professional credit, simply nodded and smiled. "Of course, Monsieur Ashford. I will make note of your special connection." The Dom Perignon he'd selected was a $400 bottle from my personal reserve collection. What made his choice particularly galling was that just last week I'd watched him at a gas station convenience store, carefully counting out exact change for a $12 bottle of grocery store champagne that he'd brought to someone else's dinner party. Penelope was the next to display her true colors. When the server brought the artisanal bread service, fresh sourdough baked with my signature herbs and served with imported French butter that cost $30 per pound, she waved dismissively. "This bread is lovely, but you know, I've been working with some of the most exclusive restaurants in the region through my marketing firm. We've completely revolutionized how fine dining establishments present themselves to discerning clientele." She looked around the table smugly. "I actually consulted on several campaigns for restaurant groups that are direct competitors to this place. I could probably give the owner some valuable insights on improving their brand positioning." But Nathaniel managed to outdo even Penelope's audacity. "Speaking of business improvements," he said, cutting into his appetizer of Hudson Valley foie gras, a $85 dish that I had personally sourced from a farm I'd visited in upstate New York. "I've been handling some major commercial real estate deals lately. Multi-million-dollar acquisitions for restaurant groups looking to expand. The legal complexities are incredible, but when you're as skilled as I am, clients trust you with their most important investments." He paused dramatically, savoring both his food and his perceived superiority. "I actually just closed a deal for a client who bought a property very similar to this one. $15 million in Beverly Hills. The negotiations took months, but that's what separates top-tier attorneys like myself from the average practitioners who handle simple family law or small business contracts." I gripped the edge of my observation booth's railing. He was bragging about negotiating my Beverly Hills purchase, while simultaneously insulting the very sister who had made that deal, and his career, possible. But my mother delivered the most painful blow of all. When the main course arrived, Chef Laurent's signature rack of lamb with truffle reduction, a dish that had earned a James Beard nomination and cost $120 per plate, she took a delicate bite and sighed with theatrical satisfaction. "You know," she said, dabbing her lips with the imported linen napkin, "I feel genuinely sorry for Victoria tonight. While we're here experiencing true culinary artistry, she's probably heating up a frozen dinner in that depressing little apartment of hers." She gestured around the dining room with her fork. "This is what success looks like. This is what happens when you make smart choices, work hard, and refuse to settle for mediocrity. Poor Victoria just never learned that lesson." Aunt Priscilla nodded sagely. "I tried to mentor her when she was younger, you know. told her that if she wanted to be taken seriously in this world, she needed to understand how business really works. But she was always so idealistic, talking about helping people and making a difference. You can't pay rent with good intentions. The irony was suffocating. I was literally watching them eat a meal that cost more than most people's weekly salary, while discussing my supposed poverty, surrounded by an ambiance I had created, being served by staff I had trained, in a restaurant I owned outright. Father raised his champagne glass, my champagne, and proposed a toast. To family success, he declared. To those of us who understand that in this world, you either achieve excellence or you get left behind. Some people are destined for greatness, while others— He paused meaningfully. Well, others are destined to serve those who are. They clinked glasses in celebration of their superiority, while I sat alone in my observation booth, having been deemed unworthy to share in their feast of my own creation. But the peak of their arrogance came when James Blackstone approached their table. Richard Ashford, Blackstone extended his hand warmly. I was hoping I'd see you here tonight. I've been trying to arrange a meeting with your Wellington Industries team about our new project. My father practically glowed with pride. Of course, James, we'd be delighted. Though I have to say, we've been so busy with our expansion into premium corporate catering services, we're actually looking to partner with more exclusive restaurant groups. Blackstone's eyebrows raised with interest. Really? That's fascinating, because I've been trying to connect with the owner of Crimson Hospitality Group about exactly that kind of partnership. They own this place, you know, along with 43 other establishments. Incredible empire, though the owner is surprisingly private. Penelope leaned forward eagerly. Oh, we're actually hoping to meet with the owner tonight. We have some business propositions that could be mutually beneficial. My marketing firm has been revolutionizing the restaurant industry, and I think we could really help them take their brand to the next level. Nathaniel jumped in. And I've been handling major restaurant acquisitions recently. I could probably provide valuable legal guidance for their expansion plans. Blackstone looked genuinely puzzled. That's interesting, because from what I understand, Crimson Hospitality has the most sophisticated marketing operation in the industry and uses only the most elite legal firms for their real estate work. But I'm sure they'd appreciate your input. As Blackstone returned to his table, my family continued their celebration, completely missing his diplomatic skepticism. They had just offered to help me improve the very businesses they'd unknowingly been working for, while sitting in the restaurant they didn't know I owned, drinking wine from the collection they weren't aware I'd curated. The server brought the dessert course. Chef Antoine's signature chocolate soufflé with gold leaf and Madagascar vanilla bean ice cream, a $45 dessert that food critics had called transcendent. Penelope took a bite and closed her eyes in bliss. This is exactly the kind of quality that separates true fine dining from pretenders. Victoria probably thinks Olive Garden is fancy dining. They laughed at their own wit while savoring dessert that had been prepared by chefs I'd personally recruited from Michelin-starred restaurants around the world. As they prepared to leave, Father loudly announced to Francois, "Please make sure the owner knows how much we enjoyed the evening. Tell them the Ashford family would love to arrange a business meeting soon. We have some exciting opportunities that could benefit an establishment like this." My hands were shaking with a mixture of rage and anticipation. In less than 24 hours, they would discover exactly who the owner was and exactly what kind of opportunities they'd been unknowingly providing for their supposedly unsuccessful daughter. They gathered their things, completely satisfied with an evening spent celebrating their superiority while consuming the fruits of my labor, oblivious to the fact that every luxury they'd enjoyed was a gift from the family member they deemed too poor to join them. After watching my family's disgraceful display of arrogance, I retreated to my private office with a crystal-clear mission. Tomorrow would be the day they learned exactly who they had been dealing with all along. But this wasn't going to be a simple confrontation. No, this required the same strategic precision I'd used to build my empire from nothing. I opened my laptop and began crafting what would become the most important business presentation of my life, not because of the money involved, but because of the justice it would deliver. First, I pulled up the vendor appreciation event I'd been planning for Friday morning. Originally intended as a simple thank you breakfast for my most valued business partners, it would now serve a far more dramatic purpose. I began redesigning the entire event around a single goal, revealing to my family exactly how their success was intertwined with mine. I called Elena, who answered on the first ring despite the late hour. Elena, I need you to completely restructure tomorrow's vendor appreciation event. Instead of the casual breakfast we planned, I want a formal presentation ceremony in the Rosewood Manor private dining room. Of course. What kind of presentation are you thinking? I want to honor our top 3 business partners of the year. Hartwell and Associates for Marketing Excellence, Morrison and Associates for Legal Services, and Wellington Industries for being our most loyal corporate catering client. I paused, savoring the irony. I want each business representative, to receive a detailed breakdown of exactly how much revenue they've generated through their partnership with Crimson Hospitality. Elena was quiet for a moment, processing the implications. Victoria, that's your entire family. Exactly, and I want the presentations to be thorough. Financial breakdowns, project timelines, future projections. I want them to see the full scope of what they've been a part of without realizing it. I spent the next 2 hours creating individualized portfolios for each family member. Penelope's folder would contain every marketing campaign she'd created for my restaurants, complete with performance metrics showing how her work had driven millions in revenue for my company. The folder would also include the award certificates she'd earned, awards that were actually recognition for promoting my restaurants. Nathaniel's portfolio would detail every legal document he'd prepared for my expansion, every property acquisition he'd negotiated, every contract he'd structured. I included photographs of each restaurant location he'd helped me acquire, along with revenue projections showing how his legal work had facilitated hundreds of millions in business growth. For my father, I compiled a comprehensive analysis of Wellington Industries' relationship with my restaurant group, catering invoices, event planning documents, corporate dining records, everything that showed how his company's success in client retention was directly tied to the prestige of dining at my establishments. But the crown jewel of my preparation was a multimedia presentation that would tell the story of Crimson Hospitality's rise to prominence. I included footage from my restaurant's grand openings, interviews with celebrity chefs who worked for me, testimonials from satisfied clients, and newspaper clippings documenting my industry awards. The presentation would culminate with the revelation that every vendor in the room had been working for the same person, the daughter they'd banned from Thanksgiving dinner for being too poor to deserve a seat at their table. I also prepared a special surprise for the end of the event. I'd arranged for my head chef, Laurent, to prepare a traditional Thanksgiving meal using the exact same menu my family had enjoyed last night at Rosewood Manor. They would taste my signature dishes for the second time in 12 hours, but this time they'd know exactly who had created the experience they'd praised so lavishly. Around midnight, I began making phone calls to key people who would help orchestrate tomorrow's events. My first call was to Marcus Thompson, the valet who had served my family earlier. Marcus, I need you to personally handle transportation for the Wellington Industries party tomorrow morning. But this time, I want you to drive my personal Tesla Model S Plaid, the white one with the custom Crimson Hospitality plates. The $200,000 Tesla? The one with your initials embossed in the leather? That's the one. I want my father to spend 30 minutes in a car that costs more than his annual salary, surrounded by evidence of my success, before he walks into the room where he'll learn the truth. Next, I called Francois to arrange the seating chart for tomorrow's event. Francois, I want the Ashworth family seated at the head table, directly facing the presentation screen. I want them to have the best view in the room for what's about to unfold. Understood, Madam Victoria. And shall I arrange for the usual vendor appreciation gifts? Yes, but with modifications. I want custom engraved crystal awards for each honoree. For Hartwell and Associates, in recognition of outstanding marketing excellence for Crimson Hospitality Group 2023. For Morrison and Associates, celebrating exceptional legal services in support of nationwide expansion. For Wellington Industries, honoring our most valued corporate catering partnership. Each award would be a beautiful, expensive reminder of exactly how much their success depended on me. My third call was to David, my assistant, who would be coordinating with all the business partners attending tomorrow's event. David, I need you to contact every vendor we're honoring tomorrow. Tell them this is a mandatory year-end review meeting disguised as an appreciation event. I want them to bring their complete project files and be prepared to present detailed reports on their work with our company. Should I mention that you'll be publicly recognizing their contributions? Absolutely. Tell them I'll be personally thanking each partnership and discussing how their work has contributed to our unprecedented growth. I want them excited about the recognition they're about to receive. The beauty of my plan was that it wasn't revenge in the traditional sense. I wasn't going to destroy their careers or humiliate them publicly. Instead, I was going to force them to confront the reality of their own success and their own cruelty in the most elegant way possible. They had built their lives and careers on the foundation of my empire, all while mocking my supposed failures. Tomorrow, they would sit in my restaurant, surrounded by my achievements, receiving awards for their contributions to my success, while finally learning that the daughter they'd deemed too poor for their table was actually the architect of everything they'd accomplished. I pulled up the final element of my plan, a revised employee handbook for all three companies. Since Hartwell & Associates, Morrison & Associates, and Wellington Industries were essentially dependent on my business for their survival, I had significant leverage over their operations. The new handbook would include policies about workplace respect, anti-discrimination measures, and sensitivity training, all designed to ensure they never treated anyone the way they'd treated me. But perhaps the most satisfying part of my preparation was the menu I'd selected for tomorrow's breakfast. Every dish would be an exact replica of what they'd eaten last night, prepared by the same chefs, using the same ingredients, plated with the same artistry. They would taste my creations twice, once in ignorance, once in humiliation. As I finalized the last details, I realized that tomorrow wouldn't just be about revealing the truth to my family. It would be about reclaiming my narrative, demonstrating my worth, and teaching them a lesson about the difference between inherited privilege and earned success. They had spent years looking down on me while standing on the shoulders of my achievements. Tomorrow they would learn exactly how far they'd fall without my support. I saved all the presentation files to my secure server and sent copies to Elena for final review. Everything was ready. In 8 hours, my family would walk into my restaurant expecting a simple business breakfast. Instead, they would receive an education in humility, success, and the consequences of judging people by their bank accounts rather than their character. The daughter they'd banned from Thanksgiving was about to give them a lesson in gratitude they'd never forget. Friday morning arrived with crisp autumn air and crystal clear skies, the perfect backdrop for what would become the most pivotal day in my family's understanding of reality. I arrived at Rosewood Manor at 7 a.m., 2 hours before the vendor appreciation event was scheduled to begin, to ensure every detail was executed flawlessly. The private dining room had been transformed overnight into a corporate presentation space that radiated success and sophistication. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Crescent Harbor, while elegant displays showcased awards, press clippings, and photographs documenting Crimson Hospitality's meteoric rise. At the center of it all was a presentation screen that would soon reveal truths my family never saw coming. At 8:45 a.m., I positioned myself in the adjacent conference room where I could observe arrivals through the one-way glass partition I'd had installed for exactly these types of situations. The first to arrive would be Penelope, and I wanted to watch her initial reaction to the environment I'd created. Marcus pulled up in my Tesla Model S Plaid at exactly 8:50 a.m., the custom Crimson Hospitality license plates gleaming in the morning sunlight. Through the car's panoramic roof, I could see Penelope's confused expression as she took in the vehicle's luxurious interior. She was undoubtedly wondering why a simple vendor appreciation breakfast required such an extravagant transportation arrangement. "Miss Ashford," Marcus said as he opened her door, "welcome to Crimson Hospitality's annual vendor recognition ceremony. Ms. Matthews is looking forward to personally thanking you for your outstanding contributions this year." Penelope's brow furrowed. "Ms. Matthews? I thought this was a general vendor meeting. Who exactly is Ms. Matthews?" "The CEO and founder of Crimson Hospitality Group, Miss. She specifically requested your presence to discuss the exceptional marketing campaigns you've developed for our restaurant portfolio." I watched Penelope's face cycle through confusion, curiosity, and then a dawning realization that something significant was happening. She'd been told this was a routine vendor meeting, but the luxury transportation, the formal venue, and the personal invitation from a CEO suggested something much more important. As she entered the private dining room, I observed her taking in the sophisticated setup. Her eyes lingered on the wall displays showcasing my restaurant's achievements, the framed articles from prestigious food and business publications, and the elegant presentation materials arranged throughout the space. Francois approached her with practiced professionalism. "Ms. Ashford, welcome to Rosewood Manor. I have instructions to seat you at the head table for this morning's presentation. Can I offer you champagne while you wait for the other honorees?" "Honorees?" Penelope's voice carried a note of excitement mixed with confusion. "I was told this was a vendor appreciation breakfast." "Indeed it is, madame. You are one of 3 business partners being specially recognized today for your exceptional contributions to Crimson Hospitality's success. The CEO will be presenting each honoree with a detailed analysis of their partnership impact." I could see Penelope's mind racing as she tried to process this information. She'd come expecting a routine business breakfast, and instead found herself being treated as a guest of honor at what appeared to be a significant corporate event. Nathaniel arrived 10 minutes later, and I watched his reaction mirror Penelope's confusion. Marcus had switched to my Bentley Continental GT for his pickup, another $300,000 vehicle from my personal collection that would reinforce the message about the level of success they were dealing with. "Mr. Ashford," Marcus explained as Nathaniel examined the car's handcrafted interior, "you're being honored today for your legal services to Crimson Hospitality. The CEO wanted to ensure you arrived in appropriate style." Nathaniel's chest puffed with pride at being recognized for his legal expertise, though I could see him trying to reconcile this VIP treatment with his assumption that he'd been hired for routine restaurant legal work. When he joined Penelope at the head table, their conversation was animated but hushed. They were clearly trying to piece together why they were receiving such extraordinary recognition from a company they thought they barely knew. My parents arrived in the final luxury vehicle, my Porsche Panamera Turbo S, a car worth more than their house. My father's eyes widened as he took in the vehicle's performance features and custom interior, while my mother seemed genuinely intimidated by the level of sophistication surrounding the event. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford," Marcus said, "Crimson Hospitality is honored to recognize Wellington Industries as our most valued corporate catering partner. The CEO is particularly excited to discuss the future of your business relationship." As my parents entered the dining room and saw Penelope and Nathaniel already seated at the head table, the family's confusion reached a crescendo. They'd each been told they were being individually honored, but now they discovered that all 3 family businesses were somehow significant partners with the same company. "What exactly is going on here?" my father whispered to Nathaniel. "I thought Wellington Industries was just one of many catering clients for this restaurant group. And I thought my legal work for them was just routine commercial real estate." Nathaniel replied quietly. "But this level of recognition suggests something much bigger." Penelope leaned across the table. "They're treating my marketing firm like we're their primary agency. I had no idea Crimson Hospitality was such a major client for any of us." I watched them piece together the scope of their individual relationships with my company, their excitement growing as they realized they were apparently much more important to this mysterious CEO than they'd understood. At exactly 9 a.m., I made my entrance. I walked through the main doors of the private dining room wearing a tailored navy Armani suit that cost more than Nathaniel's monthly salary, carrying a leather portfolio that contained the evidence of everything they were about to learn. My hair was styled in the confident updo I wore for major business presentations, and I moved with the assured pace of someone who owned everything in sight. The room fell silent as I approached the head table where my family sat, waiting to meet the successful CEO who had summoned them. Penelope saw me first, and her face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. Confusion gave way to recognition to disbelief, and disbelief to something approaching panic. "Victoria?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Nathaniel's champagne glass froze halfway to his lips, as his brain struggled to process what he was seeing. My parents simply stared, their faces blank with shock as they tried to reconcile the daughter they'd banned from Thanksgiving with the CEO they'd come to meet. I reached the head table and placed my portfolio down with deliberate precision, looking each family member in the eye before speaking. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Crimson Hospitality Group. I'm Victoria Ashford Matthews, CEO and founder. I smiled with the calm confidence that had carried me through countless high-stakes business negotiations. I believe you all know me, though perhaps not in my professional capacity. The silence stretched for what felt like an eternity. Penelope's mouth opened and closed without sound. Nathaniel set down his champagne with a trembling hand. My mother's face had gone completely pale, while my father's expression cycled between confusion and the dawning horror of realization. I understand you're here for our vendor appreciation ceremony, I continued, opening my portfolio. I'm excited to personally thank each of you for your contributions to my company's success. Shall we begin with a review of exactly how much your businesses have earned from your partnerships with me? The power dynamic had shifted completely. The daughter they'd deemed too poor for their Thanksgiving table was now standing before them as the CEO of the empire that had been funding their entire lifestyle. And we were just getting started, wasmo? The silence that followed my introduction stretched on for nearly 30 seconds, an eternity in a room where the only sound was the gentle clinking of crystal glasses, as my family's hands trembled with shock. I allowed the moment to breathe, watching their faces as the full implications of what they were seeing began to sink in. Finally, my father found his voice, though it came out as barely more than a croak. Victoria? You? This is your company? His eyes darted around the elegant dining room, taking in the awards, the press coverage, the obvious markers of tremendous success. But you work for a non-profit. You told us you work for a charity organization. I smiled and activated the presentation screen behind me. The first slide displayed the Crimson Hospitality Group logo in crisp, professional graphics, followed by our corporate motto, Excellence through Innovation. I do work for a nonprofit, I said calmly. The Victoria Ashford Foundation, which I established 3 years ago to provide culinary education scholarships for underprivileged youth. It's funded entirely by profits from my restaurant empire. I clicked to the next slide, which showed a map of all 43 restaurant locations across 6 states. But that's just one small part of what I do. Penelope's voice came out in a strangled whisper. The Hartwell & Associates contracts, the marketing campaigns, those were all for your restaurants? Every single one. I clicked to a slide showing her firm's portfolio with my company. Your award-winning campaign that increased regional restaurant traffic by 340%? That was for my Boston and Hartford locations. The social media strategy that earned 4.2 million impressions last quarter? My Connecticut coastal properties. The brand repositioning that you've been bragging about for months? You were repositioning my restaurants in the luxury dining market. I watched the color drain from her face as the reality hit her. Every professional achievement she'd been using to demonstrate her superiority over me had actually been my success, executed through her firm. But wait, Nathaniel interrupted, his lawyer's mind trying to process the legal implications. Morrison & Associates has been handling commercial real estate for Crimson Hospitality for over a year. That means... His voice trailed off as understanding dawned. That means you've been negotiating my property acquisitions, yes. I advanced to the next slide, showing a timeline of legal services his firm had provided. The Beverly Hills purchase you were bragging about last night? That's my new flagship location. The complex multi-million-dollar negotiations you claimed separated you from average practitioners? You were negotiating on my behalf, Nathaniel. He slumped back in his chair as if I'd physically struck him. The restaurant lease agreements, the expansion contracts, the zoning applications, all mine. Every late night you spent preparing documents, every complex legal strategy you developed, every victory you celebrated. You were building my empire while mocking my supposed failures. My mother finally spoke, her voice shaking. The corporate catering events, the executive dining. Wellington Industries has spent $3.7 million on corporate catering with my restaurant group over the past 2 years. I confirmed, clicking to a slide that showed their complete spending history. Your husband's business success, his client retention rates, his reputation for sophisticated corporate entertainment. It's all been built on dining experiences I created. I paused and looked directly at my father. Dad, remember last night when you toasted to those destined for greatness versus those destined to serve? You were eating a meal prepared by chefs I personally recruited, sitting in a restaurant I own, drinking wine from my private collection, while celebrating your superiority over the daughter who made it all possible. The presentation screen now displayed a comprehensive breakdown of each family member's financial dependence on my business. Hartwell & Associates, 73% of annual revenue from Crimson hospitality contracts. Morrison & Associates, 68% of billable hours related to my expansion projects. Wellington Industries, 89% of client entertainment budget spent at my establishments. This is impossible, my father stammered. You're telling us that that everything we've built has been funded by the daughter you banned from Thanksgiving for being too poor. I let that sink in before continuing. Every designer outfit Penelope bought with her marketing commissions, every luxury car Nathaniel purchased with his legal fees, every country club membership you maintain through Wellington Industries' success, it's all been paid for by my restaurants. Aunt Priscilla, who had been silent throughout the presentation, finally found her voice. But Victoria, dear, we had no idea. If we had known you were so successful. You would have treated me differently? I interrupted. You would have included me in your Thanksgiving celebration if you'd known I was wealthy? That's exactly the problem, Aunt Priscilla. Your love and respect were conditional on my bank account balance. I clicked to the next slide, which showed photographs from last night's dinner at Rosewood Manor. The images captured every moment of their arrogance. My father's pompous toast, Penelope's condescending comments about real success, Nathaniel's boasting about his legal expertise. These photos were taken last night while you celebrated my supposed failures in my own restaurant. You praised the food I created, complimented the ambiance I designed, and expressed gratitude for the luxury experience I provided, all while discussing what a disappointment I was to the family. Penelope buried her face in her hands. Oh God, Victoria, we didn't know. Didn't know what? That I was successful? That I had feelings? That mocking someone's financial situation while benefiting from their hidden generosity might be morally questionable? My voice remained calm, but the words carried the weight of years of accumulated hurt. I advanced to the final slide of this section, a photo montage showing the construction and renovation of each restaurant location, with timestamps proving I'd built this empire while they assumed I was struggling. While you were all climbing your respective career ladders, I was building the foundation that made those ladders possible. Every rung you climbed was supported by contracts with my company. Every achievement you celebrated was made possible by revenue from my restaurants. Nathaniel looked up with desperate eyes. Victoria, you have to understand. We thought we were protecting you. We didn't want you to feel bad about your situation. My situation? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. My situation is that I employ over 8,000 people, generate nearly $1 billion in annual revenue, and have been featured on the cover of every major business publication in the country. My situation is that I own this restaurant, this building, and 3 of the other properties visible from these windows. I gestured toward the harbor view that had so impressed them the night before. That yacht you were admiring last night? Mine. The private helicopter that landed on the building across the street? Also mine. The luxury cars that brought you here this morning? My personal collection. The weight of their miscalculation was becoming clear. They hadn't just misjudged my financial situation. They had built their entire sense of superiority on a foundation of ignorance. So now you know, I continued. The question is, what are we going to do about it? For the first time since entering the room, my family looked genuinely terrified. They understood that their livelihoods, their reputations, and their futures were entirely in the hands of the daughter they had deemed too poor to share a Thanksgiving meal with them. The daughter who now held all the power. The terror in my family's eyes was palpable as they waited for me to reveal what their newfound knowledge would cost them. I let the silence stretch deliberately, savoring the complete reversal of power dynamics that had taken years to orchestrate. They had spent decades looking down on me, and now they sat in my restaurant, surrounded by my success, entirely at my mercy. I reached into my portfolio and withdrew 4 thick legal documents, placing them on the table with deliberate precision. The sound of paper against crystal echoed in the hushed room like a judge's gavel. "These are contract modifications for your existing agreements with Crimson Hospitality Group," I announced, my voice carrying the authoritative tone I'd perfected in countless boardroom negotiations. Given recent developments in our business relationships, certain adjustments are necessary. Nathaniel's legal instincts kicked in despite his shock. "Contract modifications? Victoria, you can't unilaterally change existing agreements without proper legal review?" I interrupted, sliding the first document toward him. "Feel free to examine the termination clauses you negotiated on my behalf, Nathaniel. You'll find that Crimson Hospitality reserves the right to modify or terminate any service agreement with 30 days' notice for any reason deemed necessary by executive management." His face went white as he recognized his own legal language being used against him. The ironclad contracts he'd crafted to protect my interests now trapped his own family in their web of consequences. I turned to Penelope first, opening her portfolio to reveal detailed performance metrics from every campaign she'd managed for my company. "Hartwell & Associates currently derives 73% of its revenue from contracts with my restaurant group," I stated, clicking to a financial projection slide. "Effective immediately, I'm reducing our marketing budget allocation to your firm by 60%. Your remaining contracts will be restructured as month-to-month agreements rather than the annual guarantees you've been enjoying." Penelope's carefully composed facade crumbled. "Victoria, that would destroy my business. I have employees, overhead costs, commitments to other clients based on the revenue stability you've provided." "The same revenue stability you mocked when you suggested I couldn't afford to eat anywhere decent?" I asked coolly. "The same financial foundation you dismissed while bragging about your superior business acumen? Perhaps this will teach you to value the clients who actually fund your success." I clicked to a detailed breakdown showing how the reduction would impact her firm's operations. "By my calculations, Hartwell & Associates will need to reduce staff by approximately 40% and relocate to more modest office space. Of course, you're welcome to try replacing our contracts with other clients, though I understand the luxury restaurant market is quite competitive." Turning to Nathaniel, I opened his legal portfolio with the same methodical precision. "Morrison & Associates has billed Crimson Hospitality $1.8 million in legal fees over the past 18 months, I continued. "However, I've been reviewing your work product, and I've identified several areas where your legal strategies could have been more effective." Nathaniel straightened defensively. "My legal work has been exemplary. Every contract, every negotiation has been adequate," I finished. "But adequate isn't the standard I require for my expansion into the California and Texas markets. I'll be transitioning those projects to Kirkland & Ellis, the firm that handles legal work for most Fortune 500 companies." I displayed a map showing the scope of my planned expansion, 15 new restaurant locations representing over $200 million in real estate transactions. That represents approximately $3.2 million in legal fees that your firm will no longer be eligible for. Additionally, I'm implementing a new policy requiring all legal vendors to submit to quarterly performance reviews. Firms that don't meet our elevated standards will have their contracts terminated immediately. My father had been growing increasingly agitated as he watched his children's businesses being systematically dismantled. Now he erupted. "Now see here, Victoria. This is vindictive and cruel. We're your family." I turned to face him with the same calm authority I'd used to fire incompetent executives throughout my career. "Family?" I repeated, my voice dangerously quiet. "Was it family when you laughed about me using coupons at the grocery store? When you declared that some people are, quote, destined to serve while celebrating in my restaurant? When you told your business associates that success runs in our family? Well, most of us anyway?" I opened his portfolio, revealing Wellington Industries' complete financial dependence on my restaurants. Wellington Industries has generated $847,000 in new business directly attributable to client entertainment at my establishments. Your reputation for sophisticated corporate dining experiences. The reputation that landed you the partnership with Blackstone Entertainment Group exists entirely because you've been hosting clients at restaurants I own. My father's bluster deflated as the implications became clear. Effective Monday, Wellington Industries' corporate catering account will be suspended pending a comprehensive review of your company's partnership standards. Additionally, your preferred reservation status at all Crimson Hospitality locations has been revoked. I clicked to a slide showing the ripple effects this would have on his business. Without access to my restaurants for client entertainment, Wellington Industries will likely lose the Blackstone partnership within 60 days. Your other major clients will begin questioning why you can no longer secure reservations at the establishments that built your reputation. My mother, who had been silently crying throughout the presentation, finally spoke in a broken whisper. "Victoria, please. We made a mistake. We're sorry, but you're destroying our lives." "I'm not destroying anything," I replied firmly. "I'm simply removing the financial support you never knew you were receiving from the daughter you deemed unworthy of your company. You'll survive these changes. Millions of people operate successful businesses without subsidies from family members they've excluded." I stood and walked to the window overlooking Crescent Harbor, the same view they'd admired so much the night before while mocking my supposed poverty. "The question isn't whether you can survive without my help," I continued, watching boats navigate the harbor below. "The question is whether you've learned anything about treating people with dignity, regardless of their perceived financial status." I turned back to face them, and for the first time since entering the room, I allowed emotion to creep into my voice. "You banned me from Thanksgiving dinner because you were embarrassed by my supposed poverty. You mocked my career choices, dismissed my accomplishments, and celebrated your superiority, all while living off the success of the daughter you were ashamed to acknowledge." The room fell silent except for my mother's quiet sobbing. "These contract modifications will remain in effect for exactly 1 year, I announced. "After that time, we'll reassess our business relationships based on how you've chosen to treat not just me, but everyone else in your lives who might not meet your financial expectations." I gathered my portfolio and prepared to leave, pausing at the door for one final statement. "The Thanksgiving dinner you excluded me from cost you approximately $2.3 million in annual revenue. I hope it was worth it." As I walked toward the exit, I could hear Penelope calling my name, Nathaniel trying to negotiate, my father demanding I reconsider. But I had said everything I came to say. Justice had been served, and now they would learn to live with the consequences of their choices. I was halfway to the door when something made me stop. Perhaps it was my mother's broken sobbing, or the way Nathaniel sat staring at his hands in complete defeat. Or maybe it was the memory of who I used to be before I built walls around my heart to protect myself from their rejection. Whatever it was, it made me turn around. Walls around. The sight that greeted me was a family in complete ruin. Penelope had her head buried in her arms, her shoulders shaking as she calculated the destruction of everything she'd worked to build. Nathaniel was frantically scrolling through his phone, probably trying to figure out how to explain to his partners that they'd just lost their biggest client. My father sat frozen, staring at the contract modifications as if willing them to disappear. My mother continued crying quietly, dabbing at her eyes with the same imported linen napkins she'd praised the night before. For a moment, I felt something I hadn't expected: compassion. These weren't just the people who had hurt me. They were also the family who had taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, celebrated my college graduation, and been proud of me before money became the measure of my worth in their eyes. Somewhere beneath their prejudice and arrogance were people I had once loved unconditionally. I walked back to the table and set my portfolio down again, this time with gentleness instead of authority. "There is another option," I said quietly. 4 pairs of red-rimmed eyes looked up at me with desperate hope. "But first, I need to know something. Do any of you understand why I'm doing this? Not the business consequences, but the real reason behind them?" Silence stretched for nearly a minute before Penelope spoke, her voice hoarse from crying. "Because we hurt you, because we judged you for something that wasn't even true, and we were cruel about it." "That's part of it," I acknowledged, "but it goes deeper than that. You didn't just hurt me. You revealed something about your character that goes far beyond our family dynamic. You showed me that your love and respect are conditional on someone's bank account balance. I sat down at the table, something I hadn't done since entering the room as their CEO. Last night, you excluded me from Thanksgiving dinner. But it wasn't really about me being poor. It was about me being an embarrassment to your image. You were willing to abandon family because having me there might make you look bad to other wealthy people. Aunt Priscilla nodded slowly. We were shallow. We cared more about appearances than about treating you with love. Exactly. And that tells me you've probably treated other people the same way. Service workers who don't meet your standards. Colleagues who don't earn enough to impress you. Neighbors who can't afford to keep up with your lifestyle. I looked each of them in the eye. You've been using financial status as a measure of human worth, and that's not just wrong. It's dangerous. My father cleared his throat nervously. What would this other option involve? I pulled out my phone and opened a presentation I'd prepared earlier that morning, one I hadn't been sure I'd use. The Victoria Ashford Foundation that I mentioned earlier doesn't just provide culinary scholarships. It also runs a comprehensive program called Dignity First, focused on teaching business leaders about unconscious bias, respectful treatment of all people regardless of economic status, and the real meaning of success. I clicked to the first slide, showing statistics about workplace discrimination based on perceived social class. Every year, millions of people are passed over for opportunities, excluded from social situations or treated with disrespect simply because others assume they can't afford to belong. Your behavior toward me is part of a much larger pattern that affects countless people every day. Nathaniel leaned forward. You want us to join your foundation's program? I want you to help me run it, I said, watching their shocked expressions. Not as participants, as leaders. But only if you're genuinely committed to changing not just how you treat me, but how you treat everyone. I clicked to the next slide, outlining a comprehensive redemption program I'd developed. Here's what I'm proposing. Instead of the contract modifications I just announced, you'll each commit to 6 months of intensive work with the Dignity First program. You'll help design training materials, lead workshops, and personally mentor other business leaders who struggle with similar biases. Penelope's eyes widened. You want us to teach other people how not to make the mistakes we made? I want you to become advocates for the people you used to look down on. Penelope, your marketing firm will take on pro bono campaigns for nonprofits serving low-income communities. You'll use your creativity to help organizations that can't afford high-end marketing services. I turned to Nathaniel. Your legal practice will provide free legal aid to small business owners who can't afford proper legal representation. You'll use your expertise to help people build legitimate businesses instead of just serving wealthy clients. Finally, I looked at my father. Wellington Industries will partner with my foundation to provide job training and employment opportunities for people transitioning out of homelessness or poverty. You'll learn to see potential in people that others might dismiss. The room was completely quiet as they processed what I was offering. But here's the catch, I continued. This isn't about helping your businesses survive by staying in my good graces. This is about genuine personal transformation. You'll be working with people you've previously considered beneath you, and you'll need to find ways to genuinely respect and value them. I clicked to a slide showing photos from previous Dignity First workshops. Business executives working alongside former homeless individuals, lawyers providing free services to immigrant entrepreneurs, marketing professionals creating campaigns for food banks and shelters. You'll also be sharing your story. You'll tell other privileged business leaders about how your prejudices nearly destroyed your relationships and your careers. You'll be vulnerable about your mistakes and honest about your journey toward becoming better people. My mother spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. And if we do this, if we genuinely commit to this program, then after 6 months, we'll revisit our business relationships. Not just restore them, but potentially expand them. I'm planning to launch a new division of Crimson Hospitality focused on social impact dining, restaurants that specifically hire and train people who faced economic hardship. If you prove you've genuinely changed, You could be part of building something revolutionary. I leaned back and looked at each family member carefully. But I need to be clear about something. This isn't a quick fix or a performance you put on to get back in my good graces. This is about becoming fundamentally different people who measure success by how you lift others up, not by how you separate yourselves from them. Penelope was the first to speak. The pro bono work, the workshops, sharing our story, that's asking us to basically rebuild our entire approach to business and life. Yes, it is, because anything less than that would just be surface-level changes that won't last. I stood up again, but this time my posture was open rather than commanding. The choice is yours. You can accept the contract modifications I announced earlier and try to rebuild your businesses without my support. Or you can commit to 6 months of intensive personal growth and potentially emerge as leaders in creating a more equitable business community. I gathered my materials one final time. You have until Monday morning to decide. If you choose the transformation path, be here at 8 a.m., ready to begin the most challenging work of your lives. If you don't show up, the contract modifications go into effect immediately. As I walked toward the door again, I turned back one last time. And just so we're clear, if you choose this path and then treat it as a performance, or try to manipulate the process for your own benefit, the consequences will be far worse than anything I announced today. This is about genuine change, not clever strategy. I left them sitting in my restaurant, surrounded by the success they'd dismissed, facing the most important decision of their lives. Monday morning arrived with an unseasonably warm November day, and I found myself standing in the same private dining room where I'd delivered my ultimatum 3 days earlier. At exactly 7:55 a.m., I heard footsteps in the corridor outside. My family had made their choice. They entered together, but everything about their demeanor had changed. Gone were the designer clothes and confident postures. Penelope wore simple jeans and a plain sweater. The first time I'd seen her in anything that wasn't a brand name in over 5 years. Nathaniel had traded his expensive suits for khakis and a button-down shirt. My parents looked older somehow, humbled by the weight of what they'd committed to undertaking. "We're here," my father said simply. "We want to do the work." Over the next 6 months, I watched my family undergo a transformation that was more profound than anything I could have imagined when I first offered them this path. The journey began that very first week when I brought them to the Millbrook Heights Community Kitchen, a nonprofit where some of the city's most vulnerable residents came for daily meals. I wanted them to see the faces of people they'd never bothered to notice before. Penelope's first assignment was to spend 3 days serving meals alongside volunteers, without revealing her professional background or family connections. I watched through the kitchen's observation window as she struggled with the industrial coffee machine, burned her first batch of scrambled eggs, and gradually learned to move efficiently in a space designed for function rather than aesthetics. But the real change came when she met Maria Santos, not the renowned chef who worked at my restaurant, but a different Maria, a single mother of 3 who came to the community kitchen every Tuesday and Thursday because her minimum wage job at a local retail store didn't stretch far enough to feed her family properly. "I used to be a graphic designer," Maria told Penelope during their first conversation. "Had my own small business before my husband left, and I couldn't afford childcare anymore. Now I work retail and dream about getting back into creative work someday." I watched Penelope's face as she truly listened to someone she would have previously dismissed as a, quote, charity case. For the first time, she was seeing past economic circumstances to recognize genuine talent and ambition constrained by circumstance rather than choice. By the end of her first month, Penelope had not only completed her community kitchen volunteer requirement, but had also offered to help Maria rebuild her graphic design portfolio. She was using her marketing expertise to teach digital skills workshops at the community center, showing people how to promote small businesses and freelance services through social media. Nathaniel's transformation was equally dramatic, though it came through a different path. I assigned him to provide legal aid at the Riverside Legal Clinic, where he worked with immigrants, small business owners, and people facing eviction or bankruptcy. His first client was Robert Chen, a former engineer who'd lost his job during the pandemic and was trying to start a small auto repair business from his garage. Robert needed help navigating business licensing requirements and zoning restrictions, basic legal work that most law firms wouldn't take on because the fees were too small to be profitable. I had 3 interviews this month, Robert told Nathaniel during their initial consultation. All 3 companies said I was overqualified for the positions they could afford to fill and underqualified for the positions that paid enough to support my family. So I'm betting everything on this business idea. I watched Nathaniel work late into the evening, researching zoning laws and business regulations with the same intensity he'd once reserved for multi-million-dollar real estate deals. But more importantly, I watched him begin to understand that Robert's legal needs were just as valid and complex as those of his wealthy corporate clients. Within 2 months, Nathaniel had helped Robert successfully launch his auto repair business. But he didn't stop there. He started a weekly legal clinic specifically for aspiring entrepreneurs who couldn't afford traditional legal services, using his expertise to help people navigate the system that had often seemed designed to exclude them. My parents' journey was perhaps the most challenging because it required them to confront not just their prejudices, but their fundamental understanding of what constituted valuable work. I started them as volunteers with the Millbrook Heights Job Training Center, where they worked alongside people transitioning out of homelessness, former addicts in recovery, and individuals who'd been incarcerated and were trying to rebuild their lives. My father's first assignment was to help James Mitchell, a former construction worker who'd lost his housing after a workplace injury left him unable to perform physical labor. James was intelligent and motivated, but he'd been sleeping in his car for 8 months while trying to retrain for office work. "I know I look rough around the edges," James told my father during their first meeting, "but I managed construction crews for 15 years. I understand project management, budgeting, personnel coordination. I just need someone to give me a chance to prove I can translate those skills to a different environment." Initially, my father approached this like a charity project. He was helping the unfortunate James because it was required for his redemption. But as weeks passed, I watched him begin to recognize that James's management experience was legitimate and valuable, regardless of his current housing situation. My father started bringing James to Wellington Industries, not as a charity case, but as a consultant on project management systems. When James suggested improvements to their workflow processes that saved the company $30,000 in the first quarter, my father finally understood that circumstances and capability were entirely different things. By month 4, Wellington Industries had hired James as a full-time project coordinator, and my father had established a formal partnership with the Job Training Center to recruit talent from their graduates. My mother's transformation was quieter but no less significant. She began volunteering at Millbrook Heights Elementary School, working with children whose families qualified for free lunch programs. She helped with reading groups, organized supplies for students who couldn't afford basic school materials, and gradually developed relationships with families she'd previously avoided in social settings. "Mrs. Catherine is the best volunteer we've ever had," one teacher told me during a check-in visit. "She treats every child like they're capable of achieving anything, regardless of their family's financial situation. Some of these kids have never had an adult outside their family believe in them the way she does." The most powerful moment came during month 5, when my family presented their work at a Dignity First workshop for other business leaders. Rather than hiding their story or minimizing their mistakes, they were brutally honest about their prejudices and the harm they'd caused. "We measured people's worth by their bank accounts," Penelope told a room of 50 executives. "We excluded our own family member from holiday celebrations because we were embarrassed by her supposed poverty. We treated service workers, job seekers, and community members as if their financial circumstances determined their value as human beings." She paused, looking directly at several workshop participants who were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "The most humbling part wasn't learning that our sister was actually successful. It was realizing that even if she hadn't been, our behavior would have been equally wrong. People deserve dignity and respect regardless of what they can afford to buy." Nathaniel spoke next about the clients he'd met at the legal clinic. "I used to think pro bono work was something you did for tax breaks or good publicity. I never considered that the people who need free legal services might be more motivated, more grateful, and more innovative than my paying clients. I've learned more about creative problem solving from my legal aid clients than I did in 15 years of corporate law." My father's presentation focused on the Job Training Center partnership. I thought I was doing charity work, helping people who couldn't succeed in real business environments. Instead, I discovered that some of our best employees are people who've overcome significant obstacles. They work harder, stay longer, and bring perspectives that have improved our entire operation. As I watched them share their stories with vulnerability and genuine insight, I realized that the people sitting in front of me were fundamentally different from the family who had excluded me from Thanksgiving 6 months earlier. They had learned to see past circumstances, to recognize human potential, to value people for their character rather than their bank accounts, and to understand that true success meant lifting others up rather than keeping them out. 1 year after the Thanksgiving dinner that had changed everything, I stood in the same private dining room at Rosewood Manor, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. The space that had once witnessed my family's arrogance and my systematic revelation of their dependence on my success was now filled with laughter, genuine conversation, and the warmth of people who had learned to see each other as complete human beings. The guest list for this year's Thanksgiving celebration reflected the transformation that had occurred over the past 12 months. Seated around the elegant tables were not just my family and their colleagues, but also Maria Santos, the graphic designer who now ran a thriving freelance business with Penelope as her unofficial mentor and biggest advocate. Robert Chen sat beside my father, no longer as a charity case or even just an employee, but as Wellington Industries' newly promoted director of operations, whose innovations had revolutionized their entire business model. James Mitchell was there with his teenage daughter, who had just received a full scholarship to study business management, a scholarship funded by the Victoria Ashford Foundation, but recommended by my mother, who had spent months working with James's daughter on her college applications and essays. Dr. Amanda Rodriguez, the director of the Millbrook Heights Community Kitchen, raised her glass as the evening's first speaker. "A year ago, most of the people in this room didn't know each other existed," she began. "Tonight we're celebrating not just Thanksgiving, but the power of genuine connection across economic lines. The Ashford family has become one of our most valuable partners, not because of their financial contributions, but because they've learned to see our community members as individuals with talents, dreams, and wisdom to share." As applause filled the room, I watched my family's faces. The pride in their expressions was different from the smug satisfaction I'd witnessed a year ago. This was the quiet confidence that comes from knowing you've made a real difference in people's lives, not because you felt sorry for them, but because you recognized their inherent worth. Penelope stood to speak next, and I was struck by how much she'd changed. Not just in her appearance, though she'd traded designer labels for clothes that were stylish but practical, but in her entire presence. She carried herself with the assurance of someone who had discovered that true success meant something entirely different from what she'd previously believed. This year, Hartwell & Associates generated more revenue than ever before, she announced. But more importantly, we generated it by expanding our services to include small businesses, nonprofits, and community organizations that we previously thought were, quote, beneath our brand. She clicked to a presentation slide showing the firm's new client portfolio. 30% of our clients now pay reduced rates or receive pro bono services. And you know what we discovered? These clients are more loyal, more creative in their feedback, and more appreciative of excellent work than most of our high-paying corporate accounts ever were. She looked directly at Maria, who beamed back at her from across the room. Maria Santos Design now has a 6-month waiting list and has been featured in 3 national publications for her innovative small business branding work. She's taught me more about authentic marketing than I learned in my entire MBA program. Nathaniel spoke next about Morrison & Associates' evolution. Our legal aid clinic has become so successful that we've had to hire 2 additional attorneys just to handle the demand. But here's what surprised me. The legal challenges faced by small business owners and individuals are often more complex and interesting than the routine corporate work that used to fill our schedules. He gestured to Robert, who nodded encouragingly. Robert Chen's business has grown so successfully that he's now franchising his model to other former engineers who want to start their own auto repair shops. Morrison & Associates is handling all the legal work for the franchise development, and it's become one of our most innovative and profitable practice areas. My father's transformation was perhaps the most profound, because it had required him to completely rethink his understanding of business success. When he stood to speak, I saw traces of the man who had raised me, before wealth and status had hardened his heart. Wellington Industries has had its most profitable year in company history, he announced. Not because we raised our prices or cut our costs, but because we changed our hiring practices and operational philosophy. He clicked to a slide showing employee retention statistics. Our turnover rate has dropped by 70% since we started recruiting from job training programs and community centers. Employees who have overcome significant personal challenges bring a work ethic and problem-solving creativity that you simply can't find in traditional hiring pools. He paused, looking around the room. But the real success isn't measured in profits. It's measured in the fact that 18 people who were struggling to find stable employment a year ago are now thriving in careers that utilize their full potential. As the formal presentations concluded and dinner was served, I found myself in conversation with Elena, my operations manager, who had watched this entire transformation unfold. "A year ago you were ready to cut ties with your family completely," she observed. "What made you offer them the redemption path instead?" I considered her question while watching my mother help James's daughter practice her college interview responses, my father deep in conversation with Robert about supply chain innovations, and Penelope collaborating with Maria on a marketing campaign for a local food bank. I realized that revenge, even justified revenge, doesn't actually change anything, I said finally. If I had just punished them and walked away, they would have remained the same people with the same prejudices. They would have learned to be more careful about who they excluded, but they wouldn't have learned to stop excluding people altogether. I gestured around the room, where former strangers had become genuine friends and colleagues. This approach required more from me. It forced me to believe that people could change, even people who had hurt me deeply. But it also created something beautiful. A community where success is measured by how many people you lift up, not by how many you keep out. The evening's most moving moment came when Maria Santos stood to make an unscheduled speech. "A year ago, I was coming to the community kitchen twice a week because I couldn't afford groceries," she said, her voice carrying across the quiet room. I felt invisible, like society had written me off as someone who just wasn't trying hard enough. She looked at Penelope with tears in her eyes. Penelope didn't just give me business advice or marketing help. She saw me as a professional equal from the moment we met. She treated my ideas with respect, my skills as valuable, and my dreams as achievable. That recognition changed everything for me. She turned to address the entire room. "Tonight, I'm not here as someone's charity project or feel-good story. I'm here as a successful business owner, a valued colleague, and a friend. That transformation happened because people learned to see past my circumstances, to recognize my potential." As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, my family lingered at their table, clearly wanting to speak with me privately. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely comfortable being alone with them. "Victoria," my mother said softly, "we want you to know that this year has taught us something we should have learned long ago. Your worth as our daughter was never tied to your bank account, and we're ashamed that we ever acted as if it were." My father nodded. "We spent so many years focused on accumulating wealth and status that we forgot the most important lesson. Success means nothing if you achieve it by excluding or looking down on others." Penelope reached across the table to take my hand. "You saved us from becoming permanently poisoned by our own prejudices. More than that, you showed us how to build something meaningful instead of just profitable." Nathaniel added, "The work we're doing now, it's the most fulfilling our careers have ever been. We're making money, yes, but we're also making a difference. We're part of something bigger than ourselves." As I drove home that night, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The daughter who had been deemed too poor for Thanksgiving dinner had created a new model for family relationships, business partnerships, and community engagement. But perhaps the most important lesson was this: the best revenge isn't proving people wrong about who you are, it's proving them capable of becoming better than who they were. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for people who have hurt you is to believe in their capacity for growth, even when they don't believe in it themselves. My family had learned that true success isn't about keeping others out of your circle. It's about expanding your circle to include people whose perspectives, experiences, and talents can make everyone more successful. And in teaching them that lesson, I had learned something equally valuable. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting the harm that was done. It's about choosing to build something beautiful from the ashes of what was broken. This Thanksgiving, unlike last year's, I wasn't eating alone. I was surrounded by family, not just the people who shared my bloodline, but everyone who had learned to measure worth by character instead of bank accounts. It was, without question, the most successful year of my life. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.